Languages and language policy in Bolivia. Okay, first of all, some history and background demographic information. Pre-Columbian Bolivia was part of the Inca Empire, which is why Quechua, the Inca language, is one of the most widely spoken indigenous languages in the country. The Spanish conquered the Inca in the 16th century, taking control of Bolivia and the surrounding area. And until its independence, the Spanish referred to the area that would become Bolivia as Upper Peru. Bolivia gained independence from Spain in 1825 and named their country after famed revolutionary Simón Bolívar. Today, nearly 90% of Bolivians are at least partially of indigenous descent, and over half of them use an indigenous language as their everyday vernacular language. The most common languages being Quechua, Aymara, and Guarani. A survey of multilingual Bolivians showed that 2/3 of the people surveyed identified more strongly with their native cultural identity, while 1/3 stated that they identified more strongly with their national identity, that is, their identity as Bolivians. In his paper, Language Policy in Bolivia, Teofilo Laime Ajacopa divided the country's historical language policy into 3 stages: the monolingualist, bilingualist, and trilingualist stages, each characterized by their own views of language. The monolingualist stage, or the language as a problem stage, was characterized by the exclusion of indigenous languages from education and politics. From Bolivia's foundation until the 1950s or so, indigenous languages were suppressed pretty heavily and excluded from all areas of public life. In fact, indigenous people didn't even have citizenship. This left a tiny minority of the population, about 5%, in complete control of the political process. Starting in the 1950s, indigenous people's rights have been increasing, giving them property rights and a political voice, but still not full citizenship. Indigenous languages began to be incorporated into education in the more rural areas of the country, but Spanish remained the language of power and politics, requiring that anyone attempting to participate in the political process must learn it. And Ajacopa refers to this stage as the language as rights stage. The 3rd stage, or the language as linguistic capital stage, started in 2006 when Evo Morales, an indigenous socialist candidate, was elected to the presidency. His administration moved towards the decolonization of Bolivian language policy, acknowledging 36 indigenous languages as official and requiring local governments to select one of those 36 to serve as co-official with Spanish within their municipalities. Education in Bolivia now incorporates a trilingual approach using Spanish, English, and indigenous languages. In fact, one can't hold public office or work in the public sector at all if one is monolingual. This movement has been called a move towards plurinationalism and away from the idea of the nation-state as a cultural entity, incorporating several national identities within the overarching administrative apparatus of the state. However, despite these progressive moves forward in Bolivian language policy, most of Bolivia's languages are still varying levels of endangered. As this graphic from Ethnologue shows, Quechua and Spanish are both fairly secure, but the rest of the indigenous languages are on less stable ground, with 3 of the 36 official languages having gone extinct. But the fact that a language is not spoken in an area does not mean its influence has ended. In her book Between the Andes and the Amazon, Language and Meaning in Bolivia, Anna Babel talks about her experience in a rural Bolivian village where everyone insisted that none of them spoke Quechua, only Spanish. However, the longer she stayed in said village, the more she noticed Quechua words being used regularly in the Spanish the villagers spoke. While none of them were fluent Quechua speakers, they still spoke a surprisingly large amount of the language along with Spanish. My informant for this project was Rodrigo Calvo, the TA for my Spanish 2010 class. Rodrigo is from Tarija in the south of Bolivia and grew up speaking Spanish in his home. He studied Guarani and English in school, and he told me that Guarani and Quechua were both widely spoken in the countryside of Bolivia, but their use was still decreasing over time.